Hi, I'm Evan Sachs from the Washington Heights-Inwood Mask Block, and I am here today with Julia Claire Taylor, a professional opera singer who's living in New York, currently on hiatus due to long COVID. And through her experience, she has become a really wonderful COVID activist and also a donor to the Mask Block. You have given so many wonderful masks and mask covers to us, so thank you. Um,
Absolutely.
And on Instagram, she is at Julia Claire Taylor, all one word, which I'll also put in the show notes. And would you like to introduce and talk about yourself a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Julia Claire Taylor. I am a trained professional opera singer. I have 2 degrees in opera performance. And through the COVID pandemic, I was an essential worker in Midtown Manhattan. I was the only on-site employee for my financial firm. And I was actually, nobody else was in the office, so I was actively managing 3 Midtown offices during that time for gosh, like over a year and a half. And it was immediately after that point when people started returning to the office, when unfortunately I caught COVID. And it was basically right after that that I started developing my long COVID symptoms. And unfortunately, that has caused me to be sick with a myriad of symptoms that we can get into later. And the fatigue has prevented me from being able to continue singing for the time being, but I am starting to feel well enough to practice again. But my experience has made me a pretty outspoken activist for COVID awareness, long COVID awareness, and disability advocacy, and wanting to get access to services for the disabled, especially here in New York, and speaking out against injustice in the musical community and sort of the hypocrisy and lack of COVID awareness in those spaces. So yeah, it's been an interesting 3 years since I got sick, and it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really been a lot. If you had one thing that you could tell me or could tell people about the experience of long COVID, what would it be? Or two things or five things?
Um, Gosh, I mean, there is so much I want people to know about long COVID. But I think that I would start with saying that COVID is a much more complex virus than what public health information dissemination would have us believe. We've seen studies come out, specifically the one in Nature journal, that talks about how COVID can have, you know, long years lasting impact on every single organ system in the human body, multi-organ systems, and it can be really complicated. And it doesn't matter if it's your first infection or if it's your fifth or 10th or 12th infection. Any of them can have that sort of triggered effect, and they do build in a compound fashion. So the more COVID exposure you get, all the different variants, they can really trigger something long term. And it's kind of like playing a really bad game of Russian roulette. And what I also was told by one of my doctors is that COVID operates almost like a smart virus. It's like if you have like a bad knee, or like you have a family history of heart or kidney disease, COVID somehow can sort of find that weakness and sort of exacerbate it until you need the knee replaced, or you have a heart attack, or something with your kidneys goes wrong. It's like it almost can figure out what your weaknesses are and can kind of make them, like, it tips the scales almost. Um, for me personally, it seems that it was my nervous system, for whatever the reason. I do have a history of anxiety and depression, which can increase your risk of long COVID. And so I unfortunately have a chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis now, and dysautonomia and POTS, which is all sort of central nervous system based. And through a lot of hard work, research, medication, not taking no for an answer, advocacy, I have sort of found a few things that have helped sort of raise my baseline so that I am able to feel a bit more normal day to day now. But this is something that I will have to manage for the rest of my life. And that's been a hard acceptance process. And so I think, what I want people to know about long COVID is that it can happen to anybody. It can happen if you're perfectly healthy. I mean, there's Olympians with long COVID, and it can happen if you have some issues. It doesn't really discriminate. And it just because you got over your first COVID infection or whatever, you can develop it later. And it isn't necessarily a straightforward symptom onset either. My particular diagnosis journey had a lot of ups and downs, and it was very, I had, I had a surgery in the middle, because it attacked my gallbladder, and there was a lot of ins and outs and ups and downs before sort of figuring out what was really going on and what was the cause of that. So, I would also say that it's possible if you're having, strange unexplained symptoms to possibly consider long COVID as a possible cause. I think a lot of people aren't necessarily making that connection either.
That's really amazing, important information. And, like you said, it can come with other diagnoses as well.
Yeah.
For those who aren't as familiar, would you feel comfortable explaining what POTS exactly is?
Sure. Yeah. POTS is short for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And it basically is a syndrome, a collection of symptoms where the gist of it is going from lying down to standing up, your blood pressure and heart rate does not stabilize itself. So it can lead to fainting when you stand. It can lead to blood pressure drops when you stand, dizziness, instability, balance issues. And it also comes with levels of increased dehydration, temperature intolerance. For me specifically, it's heat intolerance. Um, I have a hard time in temperatures higher than 90 degrees now outside, just even being outside, walking around outside. It Your blood volume can get thinner, and it can increase some other symptoms. And chronic fatigue syndrome, I always mispronounce the scientific terminology, so I'm going to butcher this, and I am so sorry in advance. Myalgic encephalitis, I believe. Okay, I got it. Which is most often a post-viral syndrome. So it can be from COVID, it can be from Epstein-Barr, it can be Lyme, it can be kind of a myriad of viruses that cause this particular syndrome, or I believe some people can just be genetically born with it as well. Um, so I developed it, and basically the determining distinction is that you have this level of fatigue that is extremely high, and it's not just like I'm tired and I need a nap fatigue. It's like the muscular feeling of after having done like a really hard workout and your whole body aches, and a level of brain fog, a level of like really feeling exhausted sleep wise as well. And just kind of feeling like you got hit by a truck. And no amount of sleep sort of improves that feeling. Your sleep is not restful. And additionally, the chronic fatigue syndrome is distinct, excuse me, by post-exertional malaise. So when you push the fatigue and you do some sort of activity, and the activity could be doing the dishes or taking a shower or walking around the block or doing your grocery shopping or something very basic level, it exacerbates that fatigue symptom. and makes it even worse. And so then you sort of have an energy crash, and you need to rest and recuperate, but your rest isn't restful. So it's like it's a pretty nasty cycle to get stuck in. And I want to say in 2023 was the worst of my illness, especially in the summer. I was pretty housebound and almost completely bedbound that summer, especially because of, like I said, the POTS makes the temperature really hard. So I was pretty well stuck in the air conditioning. And then additionally, the post-exertional malaise kind of kept me pretty well stuck in bed. And it sort of led to this cycling of kind of only being able to work, sleep, eat in bed and like do nothing else. And it was pretty miserable for a long time.
Oh, I bet. And I'm sure this summer has been absolutely torturous for you with the high temperatures.
Yes, it has been really hard, but I will say, I have a lot more information now and I have a higher baseline now, and I feel like I have more tools to make it a little bit more tolerable. I mean, at a certain point, I just have to accept it's unwise for me to go outside, right? But I have a huge jug that stays cold of water, and I add electrolytes to it religiously, which is something that you need when you have POTS specifically. You have to add electrolytes to every beverage that you have to increase your blood volume and blood pressure consistency. And I have recently bought a little fan. Take medication to stabilize my blood pressure, my heart rate. The tachycardia side of POTS can be really scary, especially if you don't know what's going on. It kind of feels like you're having a heart attack or a panic attack, but you're not feeling panicked until you feel your heart racing, and then you're like, well, maybe I should feel panicked. Um, and it's just sort of finding ways to cool yourself, ways to cope. It was hard this summer, but I feel like, you know, knowledge is power, accepting the situation and that I have to deal with it, and kind of making sort of a cooling kit, long COVID kit for myself to just pack on my back and carry with me if I have to be outside.
Yeah, yeah, I bet you have picked up a lot of tips and tricks. With the
Yes.
major, yeah, with the major caveat that neither of us is a doctor, and we don't know anybody listening personally, likely, or aren't speaking to anybody listening personally. Do you have any general tips, advice to be taken with a grain of salt, given all that?
Yes. So actually it's funny. A lot of people, when I opened up about my long COVID journey at the beginning, and as I continued advocating about long COVID online, people and singers started coming to me asking questions and saying, could this be long COVID? What would you recommend? Things like that. And so a friend of mine who came over one day and was asking for my advice, she sort of said, you've done so much research and people come to you. You're not a doctor, but you're like a doctorette. And I like that term. I'm not a doctor, but I feel like I've done enough research that I'll call myself a doctorette. Um, so yes, if you contract COVID-19, I highly, highly recommend getting on Paxlovid if it's okayed by your doctor, as well as a prescription for metformin. Metformin has been proven to decrease your odds of long COVID by up to 41%. So I highly, highly recommend. You can even Google long COVID metformin, print out the study if your doctor requests that, and you can show it to your doctor to get that prescription. Um, and they people are quick to dismiss COVID as a cold, a flu, and want you to get back to work, right? And you want to just get back to normal. But the worst thing you can do is push through the COVID fatigue. It actually increases your risk of lasting symptoms and lasting effects of COVID. And so what you want to do is you really want to radically rest if you can. If you have to work from your bed if you can, or take the time off if you have that ability to really try to radically rest is the terminology that I have become familiar with. If you get COVID. If you can get people to help you by delivering meals, if you can get assistance in cooking for yourself, just really try to limit your activity and like be a total slug for about 2 to 4 weeks. Um, then if you are having symptoms at the 3 month mark, which is the general guideline for when it starts looking like long COVID from short COVID, um, I would Google or search up a long COVID specific clinic in your area. There are book resources, there are online resources, but going to a COVID aware doctor or seeing someone who understands long COVID and understands some of these sort of spin-off syndromes that can come from a COVID infection is really, really helpful. And seeing someone who will not dismiss your symptoms and will take you seriously. I have been so fortunate that I live in New York City, which has several amazing long COVID clinics, and a lot of doctors that have listened to me and taken my symptoms seriously. I will say at the beginning, I was pretty severely disabled by COVID and long COVID. So I sort of felt like my doctors didn't really have a choice but to take me seriously because I went from a hustling, bustling, 31-year-old woman with multiple jobs to feeling like I couldn't leave my house or my bed. So I didn't really have, they sort of had to take me seriously. Um, so I would give people that recommendation. I would also recommend reaching out to online communities, but taking information from the online communities with a big grain of salt, because I think that there are a lot of people who are very desperate for solutions and who are kind of going in paths that aren't necessarily supported by science and are a bit dodgy, I guess I would say. Um, but I wouldn't discount alternative healing methods like acupuncture has been proven to improve long COVID symptoms and neurological symptoms. There have been studies done that have shown that thus far. And for me, craniosacral physical therapy, which is kind of considered alternative, has been a complete game changer in my recovery. So, and I still do that about every 10 days to 2 weeks to sort of help maintain my condition and help alleviate some of the chronic pain that comes with my diagnosis. Um, the other thing that I would suggest is to kind of keep an open mind, especially if you are sort of diagnosed with some of these comorbidities like POTS or chronic fatigue syndrome, to, you know, simple solutions like like checking on your sleep. I got really frustrated with someone in my family who is a doctor who said, "Well, but what if you have sleep apnea that's making you really sick?" And I remember thinking like if you really are trying to chalk all this up to sleep apnea, whatever, but I took a sleep apnea test and I didn't have it. And I was surprised because the doctor who administered the test, he sort of put it into perspective for me. Like, if an improvement was linked to something as silly or simple a fix as sleep apnea, why wouldn't you try it? And I mean, to improve my POTS, a very high level of hydration was suggested by my doctor and my cardiologist. And it sounds so elementary and stupid, like drink 4 liters of water a day and another one that has pure electrolytes in it. But it does help and make a huge difference when I hit that goal consistently as opposed to when I don't. And again, not all my problems are going to be solved by sleep and drinking water, but they make a huge difference when I do. And actually, through my improvements and my different, research studies that I've done and different prescriptions that I've tried, um, I've been able to sort of like cut off some of the supplements that I really needed at the beginning through sticking to the sleep stuff, sticking to the water stuff, and as I've sort of improved my baseline, um, I've been able to sort of like kick off some of the I don't need this supplement after all anymore, and it's been helpful. And like I do want to tell people like my recovery has not been straightforward at all. It's not been sort of an uphill climb. It's been a lot of up and down and up and down. But I feel so much better now than I did even 6 months ago, and like night and day from a year ago. So there is hope, there is improvement. Like I said, for me, a lot of it has been body work. I do see a chiropractor, craniosacral therapist, and an osteopath, all for body work, for my chronic pain and my fatigue. And that's not conventional medicine necessarily. I also see a primary care doctor who specializes in chronic illness. Um, and I do take, Western medicine, but I also do this sort of unconventional stuff as well. I love your kitty.
Thanks. This is Meowie Zakrevska, named after my favorite medical history person. And
My girl just took a nap on my piano bench. I would show you, but it's a room in here.
fair enough, fair enough. I've written down things you mentioned. I think I've already been able to pull up a couple of resources on the acupuncture thing and the metformin thing. Hopefully, I'll be able to find the same to put in the show notes for cranial what sorry,
Girl, yeah, yeah.
craniosacral. Thank you, craniosacral therapy.
I had this book and I must have put it in my donate pile. It's called the Long COVID Survival Guide. It's a yellow book. And man, it really, really was such a game changer for me at the very beginning. I think I was going to post it in that's another place, the still COVIDing groups. I know that they're a little bit hard to find now. In New York, it's easy because there's a New York City one, but um, there are still COVIDing groups for people who are, still actively trying to prevent COVID infection. And they can be great places to ask questions and find community and feel less alone and bounce ideas off of each other. For people who don't know about that, they can just be a wonderful resource. They can be a little bit hard to find because they're typically private groups, but some of them are still searchable on Facebook.
If I recall correctly, I believe there are also specific long COVID support groups on Facebook as well.
There are, but I will say, especially on Facebook, it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Because a lot of people join because they don't know anything and they are hoping to learn, which is great, but there can also be a lot of misinformation circling. So you just have to be careful and to take what patients say sort of with a grain of salt. Everybody is speaking from their own personal experience and from their own vantage point, and sometimes people just don't know a lot. And like, that's okay, and they shouldn't be cast out of these groups because they don't know a lot, but I would just say, especially there and on Reddit, I would be careful about what information you take as fact, and what information you say, okay, well, that's somebody's experience and it's not necessarily my experience.
Yeah, I definitely remember at some point seeing somebody just going on about like the B12 deficiencies and such, and I'm like, I'm
The,
pretty sure that like those kids, there's a Venn diagram there, but you know.
oh yeah, I can't tell you the amount of posts I've seen about, oh, you just have to cleanse the parasites. You just have to do a parasite cleanse. And that's on Facebook and on Reddit and on Twitter. And everybody's always selling the parasite cleanse that you can buy from them. And oh, it's just, yeah, it's unfortunately people will always take advantage of a desperate market and try to make a buck. And that's not fair. It's not right. And you just have to use your own discernment. And when you have brain fog, that is not easy.
I believe brain fog has been a pretty common symptom from early on, correct? Or
Yes, yes. Actually, I read something not too long ago, that the median age diagnosed with dementia has like plummeted by like 2 or 3 years, in the last 5 years. Yes, it's really, really sad, because cognitive impairment and cognitive decline is just such a huge side effect of COVID infections. And I mean, I've been reading that, and I try to keep an open mind. It could be a variety of factors. I mean, stress has increased exponentially. The state of the world has sort of gotten really challenging, but I mean, airplane crashes have increased, boat crashes have increased, car crashes have increased, and it's sort of like I'm sort of sitting here, obviously from my standpoint, I'm like, how much of this is COVID? I'm sure nobody else is thinking that way, but I do have those thoughts like how much of this is COVID cognitive decline and how much of this is, stress or whatever. I mean, even just the psychological changes in the population, I sort of wonder, are the mood changes a result of COVID infection? Because, and I was just reading a story about a traumatic brain injury that completely changed somebody's personality. And a COVID infection that affects the brain in that way, it can do the same thing. So, it is interesting and it's sad and it's scary. And I think there's still so many questions for so many people. And I think that's also why it's so important to sort of tell these stories that aren't necessarily asking the questions, or like where a lot of these things aren't being brought up in normal conversation.
But yeah, and you're definitely not the only one, at least in like the still COVIDing community, who's like,
Yeah.
well, wait, but COVID? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely feel like there's this big divide in the, still COVIDing and the like la-di-da community where, the la-di-da community is almost entirely attributing it to like, oh, well, it was because like, we were remote for so long and all that stuff. And, meanwhile, a bunch of us are sitting here like, but how much of it is COVID? But how much of it is COVID? And I'm sure the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Yes, I completely agree. And also, I apologize if you can hear my cat in the background. I hope you can't. But she's like having a fun time scratching on something. But the thing I will say is that that old wives' tale, that your immune system is sort of use it or lose it. Yes, babies do need exposure to certain toxins, but adult immune systems are not a use it or lose it policy. It's just simply not true. I mean, just the lack of exposure to things, it doesn't mean that you lose the ability to defend yourself against those things because you were inside for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. It actually just is a protective mechanism for yourself. It's just simply not true. The science doesn't support that. And so it's like so on the one hand, it's an old wives' tale and it comes from childcare, it comes from, raising kids. And I do understand that mindset, but I think it's also part of our job as still COVIDing people and still COVIDing individuals to sort of say, hey, like I understand why you think that, but actually that's not true. And the science supports that.
Yeah, that's so, so important because that is, you know, an urban legend, an old wives' tale that crops up a lot, especially these days. And, as I've heard one doctor say, like, playing in the dirt is good for kids, but you don't want to get them sick all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you had mentioned long COVID clinics earlier, and unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of them close down. Do you have any advice for folks who are seeing long COVID clinics close down in their areas?
I do. I think that there are, if you can afford or if you can find access to online doctors that can telehealth appointments where somebody is you has a history of treating long COVID, you can look up the names of the doctors who worked at the long COVID clinic and look for where they're working now and try to find them that way. You can also call in advance of any doctor's appointment and say, hey, I'm coming here seeking treatment for long COVID. Does this particular doctor who I'm scheduled to go see, are they up to date on long COVID? Are they receptive to patients who have long COVID? And typically a staff, it's been my experience that a staff will tell you yay or nay. I mean, they'll be honest with you. I've not found somebody who said, "Oh yeah, I've been very lucky to, I should say, but like I've not had somebody who said, um well, actually, I've called about a different medical issue and I've had somebody say, "Oh, we don't really do that here." And that's fine. I'll go somewhere else, no problem. That does happen. It's not, out of bounds. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So I would literally, if a long COVID clinic has closed in your area, I would literally try to find a previous web page or whatever, look up the individual doctors who worked there and try to find out where they are now. Um, if it's a possibility to drive further or travel to a long COVID clinic or something like that, try that. You can also call a long COVID clinic out of state and see if you can get a referral to a doctor in your area and possibly ask them for advice or suggestions. A lot of long COVID clinics, I mean, depending if they're at like a big hospital or not, they have like patient coordinators or patient advocates that are expressly helping individuals who have been disabled by long COVID with some of the disability paperwork and stuff. And that person, they are typically very busy, but it is part of their job to assist patients. So you calling and saying, "Hey, I cannot physically get to your location, but I need to find a doctor for my condition." It's part of their job to help you. So I wouldn't be afraid to do that and have that conversation, reach out by phone, to get my initial appointment at the Mount Sinai Long COVID clinic. I was calling every Monday morning trying to get an appointment, and because they had originally scheduled me for something like 3 months out. But the person who scheduled me said, "We get cancellations all the time, so just keep calling." And so I literally had an alarm on my phone to call every Monday morning to try to get a cancellation. And sure enough, I did. So.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a lot of work that like you shouldn't have had to do, but that's amazing.
But that, unfortunately, in the current system and the way that things currently are, that is part of it. And it shouldn't fall on the patients who are sick, but it currently does. And if you have a partner who can support you, or a family member who can support you, or a friend who can sort of either send you a text reminder to make that call or make the call on your behalf if you're not feeling well, then even better. But yeah, it does require a level of persistence and sort of a go-getter attitude in order to sort of make any headway with this illness right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hear you. Do you have any other advice or stories that you would like to share specifically on the persistence aspect of it? Anything that's helped you with that, you know?
Something I will say is that with regards to masking, which obviously with your mask block, and you know that I am a big proponent of continuing to mask in order to prevent further infections. Preventing further infections is the number one way to avoid long COVID. It's the number one way to avoid exacerbating your current long COVID status, and causing possibly like a resurge or whatever, recurrence. Um, and whenever I'm feeling, I don't typically feel weird about masking, because if anybody says anything to me, I say I have a condition, and that typically people will leave me alone. But if I ever am feeling self-conscious or weird about it, I sort of remind myself that people are the main character in their own life. They're really not thinking about me. Um and they're thinking about themselves, and they're thinking about what they have to do, and so if I ever feel self-conscious or I ever feel weird or whatever, I sort of remind myself that nobody's really thinking about me that much, and it usually works out okay. I've not really experienced a ton of issues with masking. And the other thing I will say is, at least in New York City, I have never ceased to be surprised. Pretty regularly I'll step on a subway car and I'm not the only one masked. There'll be other individuals, and I will say, honestly, it's primarily people of color who are masking. I don't know. I don't know what the correlation is there. I do think long COVID has disproportionately affected people of color more than people who are white. But I will, and I don't have a study for that, but I'm sure that there is one. I'm sure that there is one. But I every time I've kind of gotten on a subway car, kind of feeling a little, I don't know, unsettled or whatever, I'm never alone in masking or, wanting to prevent an infection or wanting to prevent whatever it is. So I think I would just say to mask up if and prevent infections. The other thing I would say is just to kind of be cognizant and be aware that people with long COVID or people who are being COVID aware and COVID cautious, oftentimes they would like additional access to things and places. And but we feel like we can't do something safely necessarily. Um, so for example, like currently I don't feel like I have the physical stamina due to my fatigue symptoms to go to one of these like large pop concerts that comes to New York, like with some of my favorite artists, and like Lady Gaga was just here, Kesha was just here, like who else? There was somebody else I really wanted to see in New York. And I just so with my fatigue, I felt like, it would be too late of a night. I don't think I can manage it. But even if I felt like this is a once in a lifetime, I really want to go, whatever, I thought about it and how much exposure I would have in that arena. And I was like, I don't know if I can risk this. And every sort of interaction and every decision that I make, if I, is sort of a risk judgment call that I'm making personally for myself. And I will be honest, I sometimes take risks that I know other people in the still COVIDing groups would not take because they don't feel like it's worth it. But it feels right for me in that moment to make that risk. And that's another thing that there's a lot of infighting in these groups because sometimes it feels like, well, I'm not zero risk, but I'm not perfect, but I'm not, totally willy-nilly, either. I'm doing what feels right for me and the best that I can and to keep my mental health, my physical health and everything, well, right? So I think just, I would ask people to be aware, to be kind, because you really don't know what people have missed out on because they are trying to keep themselves safe the best that they can for whatever the reason. And they're trying in a world that's sort of hostile against people keeping themselves safe and trying to keep others safe as well. I would say it's become so much up to the individual that individuals who do choose to sort of try to stay safe from this long term have been so ostracized and kind of kicked to the outskirts of society. It's sad and it's a shame and it always seems to fall upon the disabled to kind of keep that, especially even in doctors' offices. I mean, I'm so surprised how many people are in a doctor's office like coughing a lung up and like they won't wear a mask. It's just ridiculous. And then the nurse who treats that person then comes into the room to treat you and you're like I, I don't want what they had like but yeah, I mean I'll at this point unfortunately I can call for systemic change and embrace the reality that unfortunately it is up to me to protect myself these days.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a big thing for me is like yes and please, yes and
Yeah.
we need both, and we're not getting one in the immediate term at least, so
Mhm.
we need to do the other.
Yes, definitely agree.
Yeah, and what you were saying about, choosing your risks wisely, like because none of us can fully avoid risks, unfortunately. But when you go to a big packed concert, you think, well, I can wear a mask, but how many other people aren't going to be wearing a mask, and one-way masking only does so much, right?
Yes, I agree. And I will say one-way masking because when we say that, then somebody runs with it and says, "See, you said masking doesn't do anything." One-way masking does do something. It protects it keeps my germs and my mouth hole, and it keeps some germs from coming into my mouth hole. It doesn't protect my eyes. It doesn't, and some things can come through the mask, unfortunately. Two-way masking is better. But one-way masking does still help. But if you're in a stadium arena and let's say in those 10,000 people, like I don't know, 300 have COVID. Um, and let's say two of them are sitting in your box area and they're coughing and breathing all over you, and you're standing there for 2 or 3 hours. That is a high risk situation, especially if you're not wearing any eye covers, if you're not, and there's things you can do. And I did want to say this as well for musicians and performers who feel like they need to unmask. There are ways without a mask that you can still do a layer of protection. You can use CPC mouthwash, you can use nasal sprays, you can use eye drops. They are not, I personally believe, and I can look up science to back myself up on this, they are not as effective as a physical barrier at keeping you safe. But if you are singing a concert or you need to unmask, they do help reduce viral load, and then you can rinse your nose and mouth and eyes after the exposure. Um, but it's still a risky situation these days. I mean, we used to talk about concerts as super spreader events and conferences, and that language has dropped, but that doesn't mean it's not still happening.
Yeah, so true. And like, thank you for saying, like something is better than nothing. Like, hey, I feel like that has been a recurring theme on my episode so far. Something is better than nothing, and we also want more,
Yes.
Um, but yeah, and like to go to your point about, singers and performers, many of whom either feel like they can't or actually can't for one reason or another. Uh, um, you've given some advice just now about like, okay, if you're taking a mask off, like here's some ways you can actually mitigate personally. Um, do you have any other advice you would give for performers, whether they actually can't or they, for some other reason, feel uncomfortable wearing a mask on stage or in whatever other context?
Yeah, so in performance, I completely understand that aesthetically, visually, it is really, really complicated to mask. In something where there isn't a visual component to it, so like let's say in like a choral concert or something where there's like a group and you're just standing and singing, I could see it being a bit more uh defensible or whatever. But I have had conductors say, it's really hard to hear you in that mask, and it's your sound is muffled or whatever. And it can be really challenging. So I 100% empathize, and I agree that it is a real challenge. And especially if there is a visual component, like if it's a fully staged performance with costumes and sets, it looks out of place. I get it. Um, I will say, as a performer, you can, especially through the rehearsal process, you can say, I don't want to get sick. And I think that that should be a good enough excuse to wear a mask. And a lot of times, a trained professional performer can be easily heard through a mask. I certainly can. I certainly could when I was singing through a mask. Um, I didn't find, I know some people say that they experience shortness of breath when they are breathing through a mask and to sing specifically. I don't personally find that. But I could see possibly if you're doing like a full stage production that where you're dancing and singing, I could see it possibly being an issue. I would say layers of mitigation, the nasal spray, the mouthwash, the eye drops, etc. That can definitely be helpful in those situations where you cannot wear a mask or you need to take it off for the duration of the performance, or literally keep your mask right off stage so that you can do your thing on stage and then grab it and put it right back on off stage. Um, and I would personally opt to wear it through the rehearsal process because especially when bodies are run down, you're working long hours, you're rehearsing, you're getting ready for a show, it's high stress, your body is more vulnerable to illness. And I think that's like prime time to protect yourself. And again, if people look at you weird, if they say anything, just say, I don't want to get sick. I mean, I think that it's a reasonable thing to say that. And I mean, God forbid, like, especially for opera companies or performances or productions where they can't necessarily afford to have an understudy, they don't want you to get sick either. They don't want to have to cancel. They don't want to have to put someone else on in your place. And I think that it's sort of a win-win for everybody. If, you know, if there's obviously like a stage kiss or whatever, I mean, there are ways to work around that. You can sort of you can practice it without your mask. You can say, okay, now we kiss and we can rehearse that later or whatever. Um, I just think it's really important, especially while the onus is on us to protect ourselves as performers, to advocate for ourselves and not be as concerned with how it looks or how other people may perceive us, and to just simply say, you know what, at the end of the day, I don't want to get sick. I don't want you guys to have to worry about me getting sick, so I'm going to wear a mask.
Yeah, I definitely remember, a couple of years back, when I was working front of house for Take Me Out, where like the actors really couldn't mask because like they were literally under showers during certain scenes.
Yeah.
At one point we had both one of our leads, hey, like who had to be out for personal reasons. I think at that point he was better from his COVID infection, but then his understudy also got COVID. So we literally had to take a day off to get an understudy for the understudy. It can be a nightmare, and truly, truly, you know, like I, I don't understand. Like, and this was like a couple of years ago when we still at least had like Broadway League required staff and cast and crew to, test regularly, to wear masks, etc., even if they weren't requiring that of the audience. So like, we had like at least 4 or 5 separate COVID cases, even with those precautions, and to your point, like that does not mean those precautions didn't work. It means it probably would have been worse if we didn't take them.
Yes. Yeah. I think the other thing that I would like to say, specifically in the case of opera, because opera opera can be so thankless because I feel like it is so competitive. And then if you finally get the gig or the prize or whatever, it's so little pay that it sort of convinces you as the performer that you are expendable and replaceable and that you don't matter and that, well, there's 100 people just like me lined up right there to take my place who are more agreeable or who don't want to wear a mask or whatever. And the fact of the matter is that every individual performer is not replaceable because they're an individual artist and they have an individual voice and they have an individual style and they bring something different to the role. Does that mean that the understudy isn't wonderful and amazing and fabulous? No, but they're different. They're different. And so I think that for me, when I am able to perform again, I'm going to actively seek out opportunities that are more amenable to me keeping myself safe, right? And more where I'm more able to kind of collaborate and kind of create the music that I want to create with the people I want to create it with, where it's not so much of an institution or industry type thing. And I'm going to carry that reminder that because since getting sick, being an opera singer was so much of who I am as a person. It wasn't just what I trained in and my area of expertise, it was a significant part of my identity. And in the last 3 years, I've had to sort of figure out who I am when I'm not singing. Um, but it is still a big part of who I am. And the thing that I learned in my time where I've not been able to sing physically because of my health was that there were so many times where I could have been publicly singing and performing, but I didn't feel ready, or I didn't feel good enough, or I didn't feel like I had the right repertoire to be singing. Oh, this song is like a smidge too high, or this is a bit not me, or whatever. I was so picky and I was like so perfectionistic that I could have been singing the whole time stuff that I loved to sing or stuff that maybe wasn't perfect, but it was like still good and still worth singing. And I want to carry sort of people people have missed hearing me sing. People have looked back on my old recordings that, I posted on my YouTube channel and they're like, "Wow, your voice is so beautiful. I really wish you were singing right now, or I wish I could hear you perform live or whatever." And it on one hand it makes me sad, but on the other hand it gives me hope because it reminds me that my voice means something artistically and it matters, even if it's not technically polished or perfect, or maybe a note is a little shaky, or maybe this song would be better sung by somebody else, but I like it, so I'm going to sing it anyway. And, so as I, start practicing again, as I'm able to start practicing again, this is what I'm reminding myself of.
Yeah, and heck, I mean, like, sometimes those imperfections like add to the performance. Like, I would just think of like one of my first experiences directing anything was directing a couple of pieces for a musical theater review, and the opera singer we had playing Sweeney Todd for Epiphany.
Oh,
Is
wow.
like that really, really intense song that Sweeney does, and like was a bass singer, and he could not make that last really, really high note.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to force himself to make it, he just broke down at the end, and like it made for like an amazingly powerful performance that like would not have happened if he could make that note, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I used to have a coach when I was living in California, and she always, because I came to opera because my mother was in musical theater. So I was always about the emotions and the acting and the storytelling more than the music. And she always kind of used to scold me because I would sort of let the emotions take over when I was singing, and it wouldn't sound as nice, and or it wasn't perfect, or it wasn't like the flawless, whatever. And she was like, you always let the emotions control your singing instead of your singing control the emotions." And on the one hand, I was like, yeah, I should be more disciplined, I should whatever. But on the other hand, it was like now I look back and I'm sort of like, well, yeah, but also I want to be as like perfect as I can be, but past a certain point, it's okay. I mean, if the emotions are in charge, they're in charge. It's art, it's stories, right? It's storytelling.
Oh, I hear that. But to get us back on track on
Yeah.
about yeah, so yeah, I got us completely off track. Sorry about that. But yeah, you've talked a little bit about like what performers themselves can do to advocate for themselves and to protect themselves. Is there anything that you would like to see, um, companies or theaters doing to protect their performers?
Yes,
Yeah, go for it.
and their audience members. I think that we should go back to having certain masked-only performances to help include the disabled and immunocompromised, or people who are just extra cautious for whatever the reason. Um, I think that having a couple of mask only performances would also help the performers, especially toward the end of the run if they're feeling a bit more run down. I think that having a mask on policy in rehearsals would also be helpful. And it would also honestly probably provide good training for the performers because let's say, I mean, like I said, I've never experienced this, but let's say somebody does feel like it's more rigorous to breathe with a mask on. That's good training. And so then when by the time you take it off for the performance, it's going to be a breeze, and you're going to sound amazing. So I think that that would be ideal. If that's not possible or if people are uncomfortable with that, then I think that having sort of an open masking policy where if people feel safer with masks on, that they're more than encouraged to wear them, and not sort of questioned or scrutinized about that. Um, I also think that it could be great to have masks like available, testing also before rehearsals, like they used to, like instant testing before rehearsals, just in case. And then like let's say like in an orchestra dress where the orchestra is in front and everybody's sort of standing and singing just to make sure that the music is all gelled together, then the person singing should be the only one with their mask off, right? That's how it used to be, and I think that it would be helpful and more hygienic to have that again. I also think that there should be a little bit of budget in every production. I know it's hard, but like for a Corey Rosenthal box in the rehearsal space, or air purifiers, or air hygiene, air cleanliness, air filtration, both in the performance space and in the rehearsal space. I think that that would be healthier for everybody. And I mean, I had like a recent um this is like TMI, but like I anyway, I bought this tea and I didn't realize how bad it smelled. It was like very like herbal holistic. And I like had I bought it like wholesale from an herb lady down the street. Anyway, I had it in like a plastic bag on my table and I kept walking through the room and I was like, what is that smell? What does that smell? Like, and I was losing my mind. I like thought there was like some mold in my house and I was turning everything upside down trying to figure out what it was. So like why I bring that up is because it could be, it's not just COVID. It could be mold, it could be other disease, it could be, you know, asbestos. Hopefully that's all gone by now, but in New York, you never know. Lead, some environmental something going on. I mean, we should just be prioritizing clean air in general in performance spaces, and with or without COVID, but especially now because of COVID. And so I think that air filtration should be an absolute minimum, and I think there should be a budget for that. I mean, ideally, state or government funding for the arts would include something like facility upkeep, with that. So like, the UV cleaners that they put in sort of higher tech audience settings, like they had them at like Davos and stuff over the audience. I mean, ideally those would be in performance spaces and be state funded or national funded or whatever, but even just basic Corey Rosenthal boxes, $50 a piece, in the rehearsal space. Yes, they're loud. Yes, they're annoying, but they do the job. So, that's what I would say in terms of administration.
Yeah, and like just the other day, yeah, in fact, Wednesday, as of the time we're recording this, I was speaking to Daniel Besanov, who I just put out that episode this morning, and one of the things he does is like he's able to do CR boxes with like PC fans or something like that, and they're a lot quieter. And
Oh.
for things like he's been saying like that, it's great for things like classrooms where like they need minimal noise from the environment, and like you said, like very good point. Um, yeah, the rehearsal spaces and performance spaces that having quieter fan, you can do it with quieter fans. Yeah, but yeah, like that's a very a very good point. Like even just like, hey, if you've got somebody on the crew or somebody on staff who's a Corsi Rosenthal box whiz, goodness knows we know some Corsi Rosenthal box whizzes in the neighborhood ourselves. As a performer, like I know like you're kind of on hiatus as you take care of your health, but have you encountered any stigma around needing to take care of your health?
I did when I was i- singing in a choral setting. In choral music, it is sort of important to have a uniform look across the choir. And as a paid section leader, I was expected for my sound and my voice to carry over the entire section. So there was a level of pressure for me to unmask and to sing loud and oh, your sound is muffled or you look a particular way. But ironically, one of the conductors who applied that pressure, the concert had to be postponed because he got COVID. And then I was actually later contracted by him to sing Christmas Eve. And at the rehearsal, I I did choose to take my mask off for a portion of the rehearsal. And during that portion, I got strep throat after the long COVID. So I was miserable at Christmas that year. Um, but so in that lesson taught me that honestly, like working with somebody who sort of stigmatizes that is just not worth it for me. And the right people who I want to work with as a professional singer will understand that my sound does carry even through a mask, that it's more important for me to keep myself safe, and hopefully that the people in the choir that I'm working with don't come to rehearsal sick and coughing and symptomatic. Because I mean, I think that maybe I'm wrong about this, but hopefully we're getting past the phase of performing arts where people feel like they need to be a hero and they need to show up even when they're sick and well, I need to get to rehearsal even if I have a fever. No, you don't. You don't need to come. You can stay home, you can rest, and you can not infect people, please. And you know what? We'll send you a recording of the rehearsal if you really feel like you need to catch up. Like I feel strongly and I'm cautiously optimistic that we're exiting that era of time. I hope we are, and I really, really hope we are.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Like, hey, yeah. I just think about like, when I was still in the performing arts, the times I attempted to, go to rehearsal sick and like, oh God, like, I just remember like one dance rehearsal where like I literally had to flip somebody over my back and like I just like and in the end I had to be like, no, like, you know what? No, I can't do this. I'm too sick. I am going to hurt you.
Well, I remember back in the day, I mean, especially like school choral ensembles or choruses, like you needed to be bleeding, puking, or dead in order to not show up at rehearsal. It was like you had to be a martyr or you had to like, whatever. It was like if you didn't you had to have a reason to not come to rehearsal. And I'm hopeful now that like there is a little bit more awareness of public health where it's like we don't want you to come to rehearsal. Like we don't want you here. Like stay home, please. I mean, that's certainly what I would say.
Exactly. Like, yeah, I like part of me is so afraid that like we've just learned nothing and we're just going back to like acting like it's 2019. But
I do feel like and this is more philosophical and psychological, right? So like zooming out, it's a pendulum, right? So things swing one way and then they swing back the other and then they kind of come toward the middle and they kind of go back and forth. So I'm hopeful that we kind of go back to the other side of the pendulum, but maybe like a little bit less than lockdowns, but more in the middle and keeping everyone safe. And then we might swing back the other way, and then it'll kind of land somewhere reasonable in the middle at the end of this. I mean, I know people would like to say that us as still COVIDing individuals are extreme, but I don't feel like we are being extreme. And I also don't feel like I feel like people will say COVID conscious, but it's like we're more like COVID aware. We're aware that COVID is still around. We're aware that COVID is still a thing. It is still dangerous. People like to say we have the tools, and we have some tools, but we really don't have a lot of answers in terms of long COVID. We don't have a lot of answers in terms of the long-term effects of COVID, other than there are long-term effects of COVID. And we're seeing it more and more all the time that it affects the body long term. And but so we have some tools. It's just we're not really using them, and they're kind of being limited. So like the free tests we used to have now, they cost $15 a pop, and I'm very consciously aware of that. So like if I'm in a group situation or setting, I'm very aware that I'm asking people to spend money if I ask people to test before we unmask. So I'm more likely to mask. We don't have access to free N95 masks anymore except through the mask block. Um, so I'm aware that like those cost money. So when I'm asking people to mask, oftentimes I provide masks and that costs me money. So, except if they are signed up for your mask distribution block. So,
Speaking of which, big shout out to places like Well Before and Kind Masks and Bona Fide Masks. All three of them have donated masks to the mask block, which means that in turn I can spend less on the masks. So
so that is so awesome. And I'm so grateful that that exists. And I'm so grateful that, because, back in the day, we made all these cloth mask covers and cloth masks because we didn't know. And there were such limited supplies in 2020 that now, they're having second life and they're being used and all of that stuff. So I think while, yes, technically we do have the tools, we also need to actively as a community distribute the tools, use the tools, invite people and make them feel more welcome with the tools, and not allow the tools to be limited or taken away, or the popularity of misinformation and propaganda to create this false narrative that COVID is over or is not a thing anymore or is not happening or is not serious, because it is. People are still dying.
yeah, people are still dying and getting like a long-term chronic illness
Yeah.
or disability, and like, for that reason, to your point about like the cloth masks, like I have loved the people who have been able to donate fun cloth masks, but those are mask covers,
Yeah, your mask
Yeah,
cover.
we need our high quality masks underneath those.
Yes. And you know what? They really do, because actually it's funny, my mom asked me for advice for like where do I find a fun color or something like that, because she said it just feels so clinical when I wear a white 3M Aura or whatever, or bifold. And I was like, you can layer the cloth ones that you made back in 2020 over the top, or you can buy them from here. But they add a little bit of variety and style. And I think that that can't be underestimated.
Yeah, like hey, having mask covers has just been so much fun in terms of like being able to spruce things up, and I really love seeing people who also like put mask chains on their masks to like kind of add a little variety.
I literally have one here I bought, gosh, I don't remember when I bought it, but I bought like a really like beda I can't mess with it too much, but it's like that
That is so amazing. I love it.
to wear to the opera. I was just like, yeah, obviously I'm gonna have like a rhinestone like mask thingy. I think it's supposed to be for like belly dancing, but like anyway, I have a beautiful, like during 2020, one of my like good designer friends, she like made beautiful like velvet cloth masks that were like had these like appliques on them, and they were so beautiful. And I have like a couple of them, and I still put them on over my masks, and they're wonderful. They're like, because I mean, like I said, going into a crowded space, I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel safe. I want to feel like am protected. And like those things make it sort of blend into my outfit a little bit better. And like I can, I'm still stylish. I'm still wearing, expressing myself through my fashion, but I'm also still safe.
Exactly. And yeah, I love that people are able to do that while still wearing like KF94 or better masks, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame that the surgical masks have sort of come under such scrutiny and also like that they that there's this rhetoric due to that study that's like masks don't work, and they've got kind of gotten that like masking in general has gotten such a bad rap, not only because of the politicization of it, but also because there is sort of the respirators work better than these dual surgical masks, and that they on a whole different level they work better. But a physical barrier that catches droplets, it does do something. It doesn't do nothing. So I think that it's a shame that those are so much more distributed than KF94, KN95s. It's like I wish that it was the other way around, that KN95s and KF94s were like at every doctor's office if people are coughing, but unfortunately we are where we are with it, and we kind of have to roll with it. And hopefully by talking about it with some level of nuance, people can kind of get back on board and realize, okay, this these masks actually do work. Even it's better to do two-way, but even one way, they do something. And I can keep myself safe by calling my local mask block, by buying a mask or whatever needs to be done to keep myself safe.
Yeah, I think that really is like such an important takeaway. Like something is better than nothing. A leaky mask is better than no mask,
Yeah.
and goodness knows, even with the, baggy blues, as many people call the surgicals, you know, um, some people have found you can use a brace to reduce the leakage,
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I could see that. Or tape, mask tape.
exactly. So like even if you have only have those quote unquote baggy blues, there are ways you can at least make them better, Um and on this wonderful hopeful note, I will ask my last question, which is, did I miss anything? Is there anything you would like to add?
There anything I'd like to add? I guess I would just say, I I am acutely aware that a lot of people talk about needing to balance their physical and mental health when it comes to protecting themselves against COVID. There's that sort of never-ending narrative. We have to live our life. I have to live my life. And I guess I would just say a couple things with regards to that. I think, yes, it is absolutely imperative that you balance your mental health and your physical health. And I don't think that the answer to staying safe from COVID is to completely isolate yourself and stay in your house and not do anything and not see anybody. And I think that is a really, really hard way to live your life and exist. And trust me, I did it in summer of 2023. It sucks. But I would also say getting long COVID and developing these symptoms that change your entire life, and you likely will have to manage for the rest of your life on some level, is also a real drag on your mental health, and physical health. And I just would caution everybody to, unfortunately, since it is up to every individual person to take care of their individual health, to take very calculated risks. And that includes, if you're dining at a restaurant, possibly choosing an outdoor table. If you're dining at a restaurant and it's just too darn crowded in there, opting for somewhere else. If it's somebody you're supposed to get together with somebody and they are like, "Hey, I'm having really bad allergies. I don't know what's going on." Just saying, "You know what? Let's reschedule." And by the way, take a COVID test. Um, uh, I think it's really, really you like your health is in, whether you're 18 or 80, I think your health is not something to play with. And I never thought that. I mean, I was always very cautious from the beginning of COVID as an opera singer. Because at the beginning they thought it was respiratory, and so I was always, always, always very, very cautious and very paranoid about getting it. I didn't want to get it. And I would just say that r- reducing the risk of infection is the best thing you can do for your mental and physical health. And taking calculated risks when you do choose to take a risk, being aware of the risk, being knowing ways of, after you take a risk or have a possible exposure, rinsing your sinus cavities in your mouth and your eyes. You can do that with like a neti pot or a squeeze bottle or whatever to try to reduce the risk of infection taking hold. Um, and just kind of knowledge is power with COVID, being aware. We're living in a society right now that is like really I would say enmeshed in cognitive dissonance as a way of life. Knowing that something is true and yet also like doing the opposite. And like and being like, yeah, but trying to arm yourself with knowledge and understanding and saying, yes, this is true, and I'm taking a risk at the same time. Yes, this is true, and you know what? This isn't worth it. Trying to really think for yourself and be your own person. And because unfortunately, the greater society has kind of chosen to leave behind public health and abandon public health in that way. I think that um, the more that we can think for ourselves, do our own research. And when I say our own research, I mean from actual scientific sources and not social media, because there's a lot of propaganda that is not true on social media. And I feel like when people say do your own research, they mean social media, and that's not what I mean. Um, just to be abundantly clear. Um, I think that just be careful. I mean, treat you only have one body, so just be careful and treat your body with utmost respect um and caution, and don't be careless with, especially when it comes to COVID and airborne disease. It's simply not worth it.
So true. And I like to say that masks aren't an inhibition to living your life. They make it possible to live your life. You know,
Absolutely.
especially as, and just to clarify for folks who aren't us and don't understand the, distinction, COVID is airborne, it's not respiratory. When you said respiratory, you meant like affecting the respiratory area.
Yeah, because in 2020, at the very beginning, when we lacked a lot of information about COVID, I mean, we were being told in March 2020 that it primarily affected the lungs. So at the time, as an opera singer, I was like, oh, well, that would be a nightmare for me. I mean, we didn't know as a society that it was full body and primarily circulatory at that time. And then I remember them saying it's airborne, and at the time I was like, does that mean it's like in the air? I was like, is it not safe for me to go outside? Like I didn't know. And we sort of all had to kind of stumble through and figure it out together. And I think people kind of have put that out of their mind because it was traumatic as a society, but I think we have to kind of remember how it happened and where we came from in order to understand how we got here.
Yeah, and like the good news is like, even if like it's depressing how much, governments are taking away resources in the name of having those resources that they're taking away, as much as that's depressing, like we do know so much more now, and so there is so much more we're able to do and be smart about today because we know so much more.
Ah, yes, and I mean, as somebody, I am a huge believer in forwarding scientific research. I've sort of, this sounds so weird, but I've donated my body in many ways to the cause. I go in every few weeks to get my blood drawn at this hospital. I am in a study drug trial at this hospital. I really am a big advocate and proponent for furthering scientific research as I'm physically able to. And we are making progress and we are gaining more tools and more understanding of long COVID as time goes on and as these studies continue. But that is contingent on funding. That is contingent on, these studies sort of meeting very high standards at that are going up now, that the government is sort of being even stricter on these studies. The funding is even harder to get because most of it is unfortunately like private at this point, because the publicly funded studies are just like fewer and far between and they're being limited in very particular ways. So I would just say, like, I mean, try to get as much information as you can from these scientific sources. I mean, Nature Journal is a great source for a lot of these studies that are coming out. And there are a couple of other ones, and like I've seen some just like in like local newspapers, like local like ABC5 websites. Like I've seen like a nasal spray study come out there, and they talk about it at the local university the study was done, and so like it kind of pops up. So I mean, anything where you can see there was a scientific study, this is the method that was used, here's where it's published, here's the university it was done, like those are the things that you can say I did my own research.
Yes, yes. Do your own research the right way. Know what are
Yeah.
valid sources. Yes,
Any video that has the X-Files theme song is not doing your own research.
exactly. Oh, that is a wonderful note to end on. I love it. Thank you so, so much, and have a lovely, lovely rest of your night.
Thank you for having me and have a wonderful night too.